Good evening. My name is Lauren, and I want to welcome you to my second vlog. Today, I wanted to talk a little bit about baking tips and some fun facts that I learned while I was in the industry and while I was at culinary school, training to become a pastry chef. So, I have a few tips and fun facts prepared, so let's get into it. So, the first tip that I wanted to share is in regards to shortbread cookies. If you've ever made them before, or if you haven't, it's a rolled cookie dough. So, you make your dough, you put it out, you roll it out with a rolling pin, and then you either cut out the shapes you want to bake or you use a cookie cutter. And it is a very simple dough. There aren't a lot of ingredients in it, but the big and main ingredient is butter. And so if you can keep your dough cold throughout the whole process, that'll help create better cookies and it'll help keep their shape when you're baking. And by keeping it cold, I mean is once you make your dough, if you're not going to use it right away, put it in the fridge. If you pull it out and you've rolled it out and you've cut your shapes out with a cookie cutter, place those on the cookie sheet and put them in the fridge for about 10 minutes before you actually go to bake it. And that'll help the cookie keep its shape of the cookie cutter a lot better, and it won't spread and turn into kind of just a shapeless blob on the cookie sheet. And that's just because of the butter that's in it. If you can kind of firm it up before you go to bake it, it won't be as soft going into the oven, and it'll help keep its shape a little bit better. The second tip I wanted to share is in regards to gingerbread houses. And if you ever find yourself making a gingerbread house at home from scratch, one thing that I learned that it didn't even occur to me that this was something that could be done, but since I've done it, it just makes so much sense. But once you've made your dough, instead of cutting out the shapes for the walls or the roofs, actually just have the slab of cookie dough rolled out to the thickness you need, put it on the cookie sheet and bake it. And as soon as it's done, and as soon as you've pulled it out of the oven, while it's still hot and still soft, that's when you actually want to cut out your shapes. So that will ensure that your lines are straight, everything matches, and it will line up, and it'll be structurally sound, and it won't be wonky, because again, the cookie dough will spread a little bit when you go to bake it. So by cutting it once it comes out and it's just soft before it hardens, that's when you want to cut it, and that will help make sure that your lines are straight and everything fits together the way it should be. The third tip I wanted to share was in regards to pie dough. So if you have ever made pie dough before, or if you haven't, the big goal with pie dough is that you've got your dry ingredients and then you've got your butter or your shortening, your fat. And you want that to be cold, and you want to mix it in until the chunks of the fat are about pea size. You don't want to mix it in all the way, because the whole point of having those chunks of the butter or the shortening will help create that flaky pie crust once it goes to bake. And so to help achieve that is to use cold ingredients. So you want to make sure that the butter is really cold out of the fridge. For the water, it's probably better to actually put it in the freezer for a little bit, so it's like freezer temperature cold. And then once you've mixed up the dough, if you don't need to use it right away, it's best to put it back in the fridge to let it rest for a little bit. So again, everything can just harden up. And then when you're ready to go use it and roll it out, you want to work with it as little as possible. So again, you're not breaking down those butter chunks, because those butter chunks will melt when it goes to bake, and that's how you get the flaky pie crust. The final tip that I wanted to share is in regards to baking a large cake. So if you're doing a sheet cake, you don't really need to worry about that because it's so thin. But if you're doing a large cake, but it's also deep, it's helpful if you can have some kind of conductor in the center to help ensure that it cooks evenly all the way through. If you don't, it's very common that you will have burnt edges and a raw center, because it just can't cook thoroughly all the way through before your edges start to burn. So if you use a flour nail or a metal piping tip in the center, it acts as a conductor, and it helps just ensure that heat is spread more evenly and that your cake will be cooked all the way through at the same time. And then I just wanted to end with a fun fact that I learned while I was at school, is that red velvet cake is actually just chocolate cake with red food dye. I thought it was something super fancy, super different, but it's really just chocolate cake with about a quarter cup of red food dye in it. So I hope you enjoyed my few tips and tricks and my fun fact in regards to baking, and hopefully that might help with some future baking endeavors. Have a great night. Bye.